Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. So throughout the year, we're talking with leaders about their leadership journeys and what they've learned along the way. Our guest today is Stephen Enfield, the CEO of POS Supply Solutions, headquartered in Middleton, Massachusetts. That's about 30 minutes north of Boston. POS Supply was founded in 1999 and today provides point-of-sale supplies that include thermal paper rolls, linerless sticky labels, and other specialty supplies. Stephen, welcome to the Trusted Advisor.
Thanks, Jim. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, always a pleasure to talk with you. So I know POS Supply. We've been working together back from my days as a VAR and ISV business coach. So it's been half a decade or more that you and I have been talking to each other. But for those folks who don't know about POS Supply, can you give a little bit of background in terms of number of employees, locations? I know you did some acquisitions, and then also about the leadership structure there to give some context for our conversation.
Sure. So as you mentioned, we were founded back in 1999, and we provide supplies for point of sale transaction and specialty printers. We have 30 team members. We're corporately based here in Middleton, Massachusetts. We have a location in Northern California, and then a third location in Memphis, Tennessee. Our leadership structure, we have 4 people on the executive team, myself, which is the CEO. We have a chief operating officer, we have a CFO, and then we have a VP of sales. And then underneath that, we have 3 managers that manage departmental teams from there.
Got it. So if I'm doing my math right, you have like 4 executive members plus 3 managers. Are there other managers beyond that, or is it 7 managers for a 30 employee team? Is that more or less what it is?
Yeah, that's more or less. We do have, like a team lead, et cetera. It's kind of a natural progression for people once they've, proved themselves and have some experience to be a supervisor or team lead. But, essentially 7 management folks.
Great. And then from an acquisition standpoint, just so everybody understands, you started in 1999. Those acquisitions didn't happen in 2000 and 2001. Those are more recent. You're able to talk about that so folks know how your organization grew and when it grew?
Yeah, so we back 5 years ago, we made our first acquisition out in Northern California, in Concord, California. We acquired a company for 2 reasons. Number one, we wanted a strategic West Coast facility. So we acquired a company back then. And then over the late last year, we acquired a company in Memphis, Tennessee, again, to give us that third strategic location. And then in between, we had 2 other small acquisitions, one in Massachusetts and one down in Philadelphia.
Got it. Great. All right. So there's organic growth and there's also that growth by acquisition as well. So, well, let's talk. We could have a whole other episode talking about acquisitions in this industry, but let's focus on. I want to talk first about culture, your leadership journey, and then we're going to talk later about something that you and I touched on earlier this year, emotional agility. But first, talk about that culture. So again, I talked, for the audience that they know, I did some online workshops. I did an in-person workshop with your organization. And I know that you're intentional about culture and people development. And again, you have 30 employees now, but very few organizations under 50 employees, very few SMBs focus on that. Can you talk about, as a leader, your philosophy on culture and then what actions you take to intentionally build a culture and build your people?
Sure. So culture is very important here at POS Supply. And, culture begins and ends with our core values, right? So it's perpetuating our core values within the company. So we hire for culture and core values. So in our interview process, we give the core value speech, and we really interview and hire to make sure there's a good match with our culture and our core values. Next, our quarterly conversations, which are quarterly reviews and our annuals, they're rated, using an EOS tool, an entrepreneur operating system tool, which we operate on. It's called the People Analyzer. So we rate them based upon their match to our core values. On that, we, in our weekly meetings, everyone in the company is involved in a weekly departmental meeting. We talk about our core values, our culture. We give core value shout outs. People that we recognize that are exhibiting our core values, they'll get a shout out. So while we do have our core values on our, on our mouse pads and up on the walls, the shiny things, which are important, we really, they're part of the fabric of the company, about those core values. And actually, last week we did a quarterly state of the company, and at every quarterly state of the company, we go through the core values. And again, we try to highlight or shout out someone that we saw exemplifying a core value on that. So people hear about our core values, early and often. And it's really, part of the DNA of POS Supply, our core values.
Great, thank you for that. And so I'm curious, like, why do you feel that's so important? Because somebody on the surface would be like, well, if you're running a POS supply company, like it really just matters to operate as efficiently as possible, right? And as effectively as possible. Like, so why are you talking about these values and making it, again, it's not just at the interview process. Like you mentioned a long list of things where it's so important. Like somebody who doesn't do that, what would be your pitch to say like how it's helped you, why somebody else should consider doing that?
Yeah, so I mean, you want to work with people that have, that you like and have similar values, right? So we want to work with people that have similar values, and there's people that don't, and that's okay too. There's other companies for them. So why it's so important to us is we want to work with people that have similar values and will fit into the culture where, our core values are, keep getting better, build strong relationships, deliver outstanding service, and bring positive energy. So people, if they have those values and they join the company, they're going to do well and thrive. And business today is very competitive and it's very challenging. So we want to make sure we've got people with the same values, so we're all rowing in the same direction, going, where we want to go on that. So and if you have people that, have the same values, you're going to, achieve a lot more than if you didn't.
Got it. And I will say from working with your team, the positive energy is definitely there, right? Even though it was through, the video camera for the most part, you can see that there is definitely positive energy. And I guess, do you hold the philosophy? And so my roots are in magazine publishing, and so one of our key positions was production manager, and they were making sure everything stayed on deadline. And so we always said to hire that position, not somebody who said, "Yeah, I'll follow those directions," but you wanted somebody who intrinsically, I always say, would break out in hives if a deadline went off, right? You didn't have to push them, like they had it inside themselves to do the things that you wanted them to do. Is that kind of what you're saying you're looking for, right? If somebody has these values, there's no arm wrestling, right? They're actually, wind at the back of your sails in order, SAILS, to move your organization forward culturally and to do the things you want to do. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, absolutely. Where they intrinsically have those values, where we can't really teach them. We can refine them and help them to get better, but we can't teach those. We can teach them, on the makeup of a linerless thermal label, but we can't, teach them, how to have, how to build strong relationships and, some of those other things. So it is a combination. And intrinsically, they do have it, but certainly we can work with them to refine those and help them get better.
Got it. Great. And so let's talk about integrating new people into that culture. So, what steps do you take? You touched on it through the interview process, but talk about with those new hires, what steps you take with them? And then also when you acquired those new employees. My guess is that's even more challenging because I know you weren't, acquiring 100-person organizations, but, acquiring an organization that has a handful of people is in a totally separate town, right? Like Northern California, you can't walk around the corner to get there from Middleton. And so, talk about that. What did you do with the new hires? What did you do with those acquisitions to make sure that the new employees were a fit and got integrated in your culture?
Yeah, so we've done some things well, and we've done some things not so well, and tried to learn from that. So, like you said, a new hire is a little bit easier because you can interview that person, and you see if they have those values, and you're very explicit about that. And in our interview process, we have multiple interviews, we have multiple people interview those people so they can really get a better understanding of that person. So we interview for core values, and then when we bring them on board, it's from day one in the onboarding process, core values are front and center, and they hear about them early and often. On that. So one of the things, we had a new hire that started last week, and that's one of the things I do training on is core values and company culture. So it's built right into the onboarding, of that, and then we have other things that support that on an ongoing basis. So, you know, it does require a lot of consistency and discipline, with core values and culture, because if you're not disciplined about it, it's easy to get, off track or off course, or you can have one bad egg that pulls the ship one way or the other. So we've got pretty good consistency and discipline on, training and onboarding with core values. The acquisitions, I will say, our first acquisition out in California, our first one, we made a lot of mistakes, and that company, we um, we didn't do a great job of hiring for fit. And the culture of the companies were very, very different. So that was pretty challenging for us. And I spent more time out there than I would have liked. We had to make some, personnel adjustments, based on that. So that was rough. And again, chalk that up to a rookie mistake. The most recent one we made, going into it, we were more cognizant of the core value fit and the people fit into our culture. So we really evaluated the acquisition more from a cultural and core value fit, rather than just the X's and O's, the financials, the customers, et cetera. And we interviewed all the people, and kind of rehired them, even though we did know ahead of the time, we were going to hire them. But we treated them like new hires, and they went through the same onboarding process
Okay.
as a new hire would go. So, as we've made additional acquisitions, we tend to get better every time at incorporating those people into the company culture and core values.
Got it. No, thank you for that. And it's interesting. I was jotting down some of the things you did. So you play a role yourself, right? You're busy. You've got a 30-person company, right? All sorts of stuff going on. Why do you make sure you are the one playing the role in delivering the culture, right? You've got a COO, you got a CFO, you got a VP of sales, they have managers. Why do you feel it's important that you're the one delivering that from the get-go?
Yeah, I would say it's just, they if they hear it from me, it's coming top down that they are serious about those core values. It's just not a plaque on a wall or something they mentioned in an interview. So they hear that the first day they come to work, that core values and culture are very important, and it's not just lip service, or so I think it's important that they hear that from me, early on. And that's, it's one of my five key responsibilities as CEO. So it's a culture and core value head. So it's important for me to communicate that to everyone.
Yeah, so you've got to be the lead person promoting the values, right? Because if you stop talking about it, everyone else will stop talking about it. And I guess if a new hire hears about it in the interview process, but they don't hear about it, you mentioned all the systems that it's integrated into, right? You said the quarterly meeting, the weekly meeting, you have an award system based on it. It seems like that's what keeps it alive. So they realize it's not just lip service, right? Like you're integrating it into the daily fabric.
Correct. Yep, absolutely.
All right, so that's the culture, that's broadly. Talk about yourself. What steps do you take to build yourself as a leader? I know from history, you and I have talked about Vistage before. I was actually just talking with another RSP member yesterday, and he's like, "Are you familiar with Vistage?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am. I'm actually talking to Stephen Enfield tomorrow, who has been engaged in Vistage." So, can you talk about that? Can you talk about how that's impacted you as a leader, and what other things do you do to build yourself as a leader?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, Vistage, I've been a member at Vistage for 5+ years, and Vistage is a global organization that caters to small to medium size, executives. Um, and we meet monthly, so there's a group of 15 like-minded, CEOs, entrepreneurs of small to medium size companies, and we typically, we have a chairperson who I meet with one-on-one every month for a few hours, and then we have the monthly meetings. And so Vistage is a great opportunity where we have speakers every month. So they bring in speakers on leadership and other topics. It's like a kind of a board of directors as well. So if I'm struggling with something from a business perspective or even personally, I can bring that to the Vistage team and get feedback from that team. So, and then, the speakers they have are really, really solid as well. And we have this group of other CEOs. It's super valuable. If I have a question or I'm struggling with something, I can shoot out an email to these 15 folks, and they'll respond with their thoughts and ideas. And it's a safe, confidential space where we can be open, honest, vulnerable. We can challenge one another, and over time, with people that have been in that group for a long time, it's great because you develop personal relationships, and once you have that trust, you're able to be more vulnerable and get more out of it from that perspective. So yeah, and then I meet monthly with my chair, a person that's been in business and bought and sold companies. It's so he's a chair slash coach, very helpful person that has become a mentor of mine as well. So that's been really valuable for me.
And so can you talk about, thank you for the detail there. Can you talk about specifically how are you different as a leader? How is your business better off compared to where you were 5 years ago? Because I always think like when we're doing these podcasts, I talk to leaders who are investing themselves, investing in their company, but I'm thinking of like the skeptics out there who just say, I'm way too busy. That just sounds like a bunch of feel good, whatever. So I was going to say I could name some specific members right now. They're probably saying, "Are you talking about me?"
Yeah.
And so, what would be, like? Can you give a meaningful specific that says how you're different now, how your business is better now than you were 5 years ago because of the time and money you've invested in Vistage?
Yeah, so I think a couple things come to mind. So I think number one, you've got a peer group that if you've got a challenge with an executive, a customer, or strategy, to be able to bring that issue to the group and get feedback from 15 different people, that is super, super valuable. I've had many instances where there was a challenge with the company, a person, and that feedback is really valuable. Also, it's a group that gives you, critical feedback. You know, where if you are presenting an issue and maybe it's a mindset issue or you're stuck on things, they broaden your thinking and maybe give you some ideas on a blind spot you had there. So that group is really valuable for me to process issues, process challenges with from that perspective. And then again with the chair, you've got accountability there as well, where they say, okay, Steve, you committed to do these two things, last quarter, how are you coming on those? So again, you're committing to things, and you've got people holding you accountable to make progress, to move forward, to get past those. So yeah, and so that's an invaluable group to help us to grow and move forward, on that. And we can learn from one another's mistakes too, because that, yes, I'm in the point of sale world, someone else might be in construction or a metal fabrication shop, but we have a lot of the same issues, regardless of the industries that we're in as small to medium-sized business owners.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, thanks for that. And so you brought up, I feel like I should get some sponsors. We should give that to Vistage, see if they'll kick the RSPA some money, make a donation to the scholarship fund on behalf of the commercial you just gave them. But before we get to commercial, you brought up mistakes. And so can you talk about like an experience that shaped you as a leader, like a story that stuck with you and really shaped you as a leader from early on in your career? I say mistake because the mistakes are the ones, or the bad times are the ones that really shaped me the most. Yours doesn't have to be a mistake, but can you talk about an experience from early on in your leadership career that really impacts you today?
Yeah, good question. There's many to choose from. So I'll pick one that was very impactful for me. So um, I was in a seminar, and I can't remember where it was, but they suggested we go to 5 of our closest um, family and professional acquaintances or confidants or friends, etc., and ask them to give me feedback on my 3 biggest strengths and my 3 biggest weaknesses. So, and they really gave us a scripted email, and they made it real easy. So, and they asked us to do it right in the conference. So I did that, and the feedback that I got was mostly what I expected, but there was one common theme that took me aback, and it was my ability to follow through on my commitments, and that just hit me like a punch in the gut. And they were absolutely right. So 3 out of the 5 people that I asked said that was one of them. You've got good intentions, and I know you're busy and all that other stuff, but that has stuck with me. And I'm constantly working on following through on any commitments to completion, or not committing to them, saying no, which I've had to learn to do as well. So it's really stuck to me, because I really want to be a man and a person of my word and my commitments. And it's not like I was trying to screw anyone. It was more just I got busy and sidetracked, and life happened. But I've learned from that, and it's a work in progress too. I constantly have to try to say no and make sure I'm following through on commitments.
And so, thank you for sharing that. Was it just a mindset shift, or is it a mindset and then a bunch of systems you had to put into place in order to be able to follow through on that?
Yeah, it's a combination of things, because it's for me, it wasn't just a mindset, because again, I do want to follow through on my commitments. I want to be a man of my word. However, you've got to have the systems that support that. What do they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
I could have a good intention and a good mindset, but what are my systems supporting those things? So part of that system is, saying no, being, sometimes it's as important what you say no to as what you say yes to. So
hmm
saying no and not overcommitting, and then, following systems, and I mentioned, EOS, it's a set of systems and tools that help me to follow through on those commitments and hold me accountable, and also make sure I don't make too many commitments there. So, and then, also, again, I've asked those same people for accountability on making sure I am following through on those commitments, that if they see anything where I'm not, to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, Steve, this is one of those things you asked me to mention."
And I'm curious, was this pre-EOS that you got this feedback? Was it during when you already had EOS? I'm just curious.
It was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. So probably just into EOS.
Okay. All right. Good, because so EOS, for folks who don't know, like Stephen said, entrepreneurial operating system. I was in fact at an event last night that my daughter's going to college. They had like a meet and greet, and so I met somebody who was actually a part of a leadership coaching group, and they had not heard of EOS before. And I always tell people, I know it's not the best known, but in our industry, in the retail IT industry, it is the one that SMB leaders say to me is the most impactful for their organization. So I, recommend our audience look into Gino Wickman, right? Traction is the book that's all
Yep.
about the entrepreneurial operating system. And there's a heck of a lot you can take away from that. But that's what it really seems to be like: systems to make sure things don't fall through the cracks, holding yourself accountable, because you want to do that, or else your customers will by working with somebody else.
Right. Yeah. I'll give you a little commercial before you pop into the commercial. So I originally found out about EOS at an RSPA event probably 10 years ago. There was a speaker by the name of Tom Bauer that
Tom
spoke
Bauer. Yeah.
on EOS. So that was to put the idea in my mind. And then, 3 or 4 years later is when, it kind of, that light bulb went off. Oh yeah, these are the things I'm struggling with, hitting the ceiling. And, EOS is designed to help us break through. So that was the genesis of EOS for me, was at a RSPA conference.
Excellent, fabulous. So I'm glad to hear that. That perfectly leads us into our commercial, to pause here and let our listeners know, listeners and viewers know about the Retail Solution Providers Association. The RSPA is North America's largest community of VARs, software developers, vendors, and distributors in the retail, restaurant, grocery, and cannabis verticals. The RSPA is a perfect fit for any organization that's serious about growth in those markets. Also, we want to say thanks to our sponsors who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our platinum sponsor is Blue Star. Our gold sponsors are CoCard, Epson, Heartland, and ScanSource. And our unofficial sponsors for this episode are Vistage and EOS system. So finally, we want to make sure registration is open for Retail Now 2024, the Retail IT Channel's #1 trade show, education conference, and networking event. This year's event is set for July 28th through 30th at the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas. Stephen just mentioned that's where he first heard about EOS. For more information, visit gorspa.org/retail now. Retail Now is where the industry meets. So you can register for the show at gorspa.org/retail now. Recommend, I know when this podcast is going to be dropping, the hotel books up very quickly. We have a great rate. So if you haven't booked your hotel room, by all means, do that sooner rather than later. So, all right, Stephen. So thank you for sharing your personal story. I want to spend the rest of our time today discussing something you mentioned to me earlier this year when we attended a party that was hosted by Bixalon during the NRF event in New York City. And I think it shows people how you're wired a little bit, right? That you're at this event, the beer's flowing, there's food, snacks, and whatever. And you come up to me and say, I want to talk to you about emotional agility, right? And so I'm going to anoint you right now as the RSPA's foremost expert on emotional agility and ask you to share with our audience, what is emotional agility? How did it end up on your radar? And then I have a whole bunch of follow-up questions about that.
Yeah. So first, let me set the record straight. So I am far from an expert on emotional agility, but I'll give you the kind of the history of that. So I was in New York and we were at the Bixalon event. And so I just gotten out of a Vistage meeting, I think a couple weeks prior. And there was a speaker by the name of Mark Altman from a company called Mindset Go. And Mark spoke on conversational intelligence and emotional agility strategies. And what my definition of emotional agility would be the ability for one, for us to deal with our thoughts and our emotions, both positive and negative, and the ability for us to read others' thoughts and emotions on that. To kind of have that self-awareness, the self-control, the empathy, the motivation. So it's everything around your thoughts and emotions, right? And in this day and age, with all the information flying at us from one another, social media, advertising, there's a lot of thoughts and emotions. And as as a leader, we're kind of told to be, you've got to be stoic and you've got to be, positive, rah rah. But sometimes we take those thoughts and emotions and we either act on them, or stuff them down, which either one of them is not necessarily the best thing you can do, on that. So what I was particularly, so we just gotten out of a webinar on that, which again brought up a lot of good points around emotional agility, which was a new concept to me. You hear a lot about emotional intelligence, that's been the buzzword for the last couple of years, on that. And then my question to you, I think, was, we talked about emotional agility, and then we talked sports about what coaches out there do you think are emotionally agile, on that. And the conversation in our group talked about, I'm from, Massachusetts, so a Patriot fan,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a Bill Belichick fan to a point. So
Yeah.
talked about Bill
Thank you for the
Belichick.
asterisk by
Yeah,
Bill
and
Belichick to a point.
you know, does Bill Belichick as a coach, did he have good emotional agility? And the conversation then went, he he's someone that is very rigid, sticks to his gun, has got a process, and that served him well for a lot of years. However, he's someone that it's kind of his way or the highway, with everything. And you take a look at his star Tom Brady. If he had a little bit of emotional intelligence, could he have kept Tom Brady for another couple of years rather than going to Tampa Bay and winning a Super Bowl down there? So, and then you and I got to talking about other coaches that we thought had that emotional agility to be able to handle the athletes of today, which are different than they were 20 years ago. And same with our employees and our customers. There's different things coming at us. So our ability to deal, with the thoughts and emotions as in our own minds, and then the thoughts and emotions of the people we deal with. So that's kind of the genesis of all of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And if memory serves me right, um, was Gino Ariema, the UConn women's basketball coach, somebody who we talked about as
Yes.
emotional
Yep.
agility? And I think Gino didn't pop into mind right away, but after thinking about it, because I wrote a book that maybe folks can see over my shoulder, interviewing walk-ons, and those are non-scholarship athletes, who play on a scholarship team. And somebody I interviewed there, she was a walk-on for the UConn women's basketball team, and a lot of folks see Gino Ariema, for folks who don't know him, like he is a hard-nosed, tough guy, hard driving. But the way that she presented about him was like, I love him. He was so great. He was whatever. And it's like, wow, I don't see that. But Stephen, this is what is it? Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. So right before this interview, I checked my Twitter feed and something popped up, and it was Gino Ariema with one of his players who had just gotten drafted by the NBA, WNBA. She's walking into his office, and he's joking with her about, like, I saw you shooting down there. You didn't shoot like that when you played here, kind of,
Yeah.
and she just I got done playing there. And then he says, hey, congratulations on getting drafted. You got to get me your schedule so I can see you play. And she says, well, if I make the team. And he's like, and you could see him adjust to, like, she needed a confidence boost. And he's like, hey, what are you talking about? You're gonna you watch your first practice. You're gonna need one practice. You're gonna figure out what's going on. They drafted you for a reason. Bring that reason there. She starts tearing up, and then she starts saying to him, like, you played such an important role and you're so special and whatever. And he's sitting there looking at her, and then he just says, you're talking about yourself. Like, you're the special one. You're going to be great. And it was just incredible to see this guy who, anybody who's seen Gino REM, you see him again, like not smiling, hard driving, hard nose, but boy, was he adapting and gave her exactly what she needed in that moment. So I guess, is that what you would say is an example of like that's emotional agility? You got to be tough and push people when you need to, but you gotta, when they're tearing up or they need a shoulder to lean on, you got to slow down and be able to handle that. Is that emotional agility?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good example, of that, where you've got to, you don't want to compromise your values, right? But you want to be, two of the takeaways from the seminar that I was in. Number one was default to curiosity, and then the other one was suspend judgment, right?
Okay.
Um, so, part of defaulting to curiosity is, rather than to, shrug that off or whatever, you know, try to understand the person you're communicating with better and understand the why behind that, so, I find that's helpful for me, where, someone will come in, or I'll make judgments and I'll assume that I know when I don't always know. So that's one thing that I've worked hard at to try to get better at, is just to be more curious and default to curiosity rather than to, jump to an assumption.
Yeah. So how do you apply that at work? The defaulting to curiosity as opposed to judgment. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, if, let's say, someone, needed to get something done and they didn't, rather than coming down on them, why didn't you get that done? Tell me more about why you didn't get that done, and so just don't make assumptions why they didn't, ask more questions, and, there may be something else in there that you didn't see or you didn't know, or that you can do better next time communicating your expectations.
Yeah, so you don't want to assume like they're lazy, they don't care about work, right? You have to find out what exactly is eating at them. We actually had a candidate in an interview process. Part of it was sitting for a half day listening under headsets to how salespeople made phone calls. She fell asleep during that, and so you would think, throw her out, get rid of her. And so the question was asked, "You fell asleep. Like, why'd you fall asleep?" And she's like, "Okay, I apologize for that. My sister just had a baby, and my sister needed help yesterday, and I was up all night. Like, I have not slept at all, and I could have canceled this, but I'm like, I got to help my sister. I got to do this interview. I thought I could make my way through it, and then we ended up hiring her, and she was fabulous. But yeah, asking those questions instead of giving them the boot. So it makes me think of, I'm looking at the RSPA's values. We have our character traits. There's one of generosity, and it says charitably interpret the actions of others, have goodwill for others. And that's what it sounds like you're talking about, having a more generous mindset. I used to work down the hallway from a psychotherapist, and we talk about somebody who misbehaved, and I would say, "What a jerk!" And her response would be, "I wonder what happened in their life that would cause them to behave that way." And I'd be like, "Oh, go ahead, be kind and generous." Like, and so I think that's maybe something we have to learn as business leaders, right? You have to make quick decisions, but you don't want to make them too quick. You've got to ask those questions before you jump to it. Is that, I guess, another way that you see emotional agility helping out in the workplace?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you've got to, default to give people the benefit of the doubt, and assume the best, on that, which in this day and age is just tough, because we're, just bombarded with, snippets of information that, generally are negative, or, whatnot. So I think that's part of that emotional agility, is, don't make assumptions.
Got it. Yeah, don't assume and don't keep driving forward. You have to go different speeds, is essentially what it is. You can't say I'm treating everybody the same way every time.
Right, right. Yeah.
So there's a book, Emotional Agility, a bestseller, Wall Street Journal bestseller by Susan David, called Emotional Agility. I don't know if the presentation was based on that or if you've been exposed to that book at all. So maybe Susan will be our resident expert on emotional agility since she wrote the book. So I wanted to share a few quotes with you and then get your take on it. And so one of them is emotional agility is about loosening up, calming down and living with more intention. It's about choosing how you respond to your emotional warning system. So talk about that, where it's reacting, but not, reacting like, I guess, a feral animal, instinctively running it through a thought process.
Yeah, so I think, again, we want to be able to make sure we're listening well, and taking everything in, asking clarifying questions, and we have a lot of emotions coming at us, and we want to make sure we process those emotions and feelings appropriately. Again, whether they're positive or negative, right? Before blurting out something, and we process those, and responding appropriately, as opposed to reacting appropriately. So I think it's hearing those things, running those through your internal filter, before reacting. You're better off responding on those. So yeah, I think that's critical. And sometimes you need time, and not just 10 seconds.
Yeah.
You might need a day to come back and respond to some of those things, and whatnot. And it's okay to say, hey, I need to process this, let me get back to you. Because we've all had those, or I certainly have had my share of moments where I reacted and didn't process them, and the reaction inevitably wasn't my best work.
I tend to react, and one thing that I've needed to work on is interrupting people. And so, like you talk about needing time to process, sometimes I'll want to interrupt them because I've already processed it before they're done with their sentence. But I work with another guy; he would let you get it out, and he would sit there and he would just say, he'd put his finger up in the air, say "computing," and he would sit there and think about it. It was pretty good, because he didn't want to overly react to it. All right, here's another quote from the book. And I would say this. So think about this for the resellers who are complaining about, I wish vendors did this. I wish payment companies did this. It says, the most effective way to transform your life is not by quitting your job and moving to an ashram. It's a monastery. I had to look it up. It says, but to paraphrase Teddy Roosevelt, by doing what you can with what you have where you are. Can you talk about that? What is it? Go to war with the army you have, not the army you wish you had.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's face it, we get dealt lemons sometimes, right? And you got to make the lemonade. But, with that situation, again, is to, you know, take that step back, and process what you have. But then, again, I feel like I'm overusing it, but default to that curiosity. So if it's a vendor issue, ask that vendor, hey, what, rather than saying, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this, you turn it around and say, what can I do that might help this situation? And maybe it's, I need to place the orders, ahead of time, or place them in a different way. So it's not you pointing the finger. It's I looking at the situation. How can I make this situation better?
I think one of the things we covered in a past workshop was asking the question, what am I doing to cause this behavior? Not that that means it's victim blaming always or something like that, but there's nothing wrong with starting with that question, what am I doing? And your reaction should be nothing, I'm perfect here, right? Like
Right.
actually, self-examination, what are the unexamined life is not worth living, right? Self-examination, what am I doing to potentially cause this behavior? So all right, another quote from the book. And this book is full of good quotes. It says, life is full of diving boards and other precipices, but making the leap is not about ignoring, fixing, fighting, or controlling fear. Rather, it's about accepting and noticing all your emotions and thoughts, viewing even the most powerful of them with compassion and curiosity. There's that word. And then choosing courage over comfort. I love that. Choose courage over comfort in order to do whatever you've determined is most important to you. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So I think, as leaders, we have, there's a lot of challenging decisions we need to make. And I know sometimes some of my biggest mistakes are decisions that I didn't make. It was the no decision.
Yeah.
But as leaders, we've got to have the courage to make those decisions. And the way I view that sometimes is trying to be vulnerable, where, with my executive team, hey, we've got this decision, and being vulnerable. Hey, I'm feeling torn on what to do here. I'm struggling, sharing my emotions and feelings about that. Again, being a little bit vulnerable there, and recognizing, in some cases, the elephant in the room, but help other people, ask other people for help on that, and making those decisions on that, and sharing your struggle, and that will help you to make the very best decision you can on that. Again, getting back to some of the tools and best practices is, at first you just got to recognize, hey, I'm having a hard time making this decision, or I need help here. Getting feedback from those people and having them hold you accountable, I find can be helpful. But it's part of that emotional agility, recognizing you've got these feelings and emotions, and gives you a productive outlet to deal with those.
Yeah. So talk about letting your team see you struggle. Like you're the CEO, you're the leader, they're turning to you for the answers. And so sometimes people think, oh, I can't let them see me struggle. I have to, for this, I know exactly what we're doing. Talk about balancing that, right? You do want to be seen as a leader, but that there's nothing wrong with having your team see you struggling through figuring it out if it's a tricky situation. Talk about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I'll shout out someone that I'm a big fan of, Patrick Lencioni, who's written several books, the Five Dysfunctions of a Team, The Ideal Team Player, and he's got a podcast, that at the table with
At
Patrick
the table. Yeah.
Lencioni, which is
Hmm.
at the top of my list. And he is one of those guys that he's brilliant, number one, but he's just an average Joe, and he talks about things at such a level that you can understand. And I've learned a lot from him, in leading with vulnerability. And like you said, it is a balance, right? But I've worked hard at trying to do that, and make that balance. But I've found that I people appreciate that, hey, I'm struggling here, or this was a tough decision, but we had to make it, on that. So uh my nature is not to show that, right? Is just lead like this, and don't share that. So over the years, I've gotten better at being more vulnerable, both with the entire team, but then also the executive team, where I have a high level of trust with. So
Hmm.
I do think, and I have seen, that people appreciate that openness, the honesty, and the vulnerability. Again, a little different with a whole company meeting compared to your executive team, but
Yes.
it is one thing we talk about at the executive team level, to be open, honest, and vulnerable.
Yeah, you don't want to get up in front of your whole team like, I'm not sure about the future of this industry. It keeps me up, and everyone's going to be like, oh my gosh, I got to update my LinkedIn profile, right? Get my
Right,
resume
right.
out. So, all right, last question for you. We just have about a couple minutes left. Last quote from the book. It says, "Who's in charge, the thinker or the thought? Are we managing our own lives according to our own values?" There's that word again. "And what's important to us, or are we simply being carried along by the tide?" I guess talk about that in terms of really, maybe it sums up our whole conversation: values over your initial emotional reaction.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to be. We've got to center ourselves on our values, and it's tough because the tide of the world we live in today is always pulling or pushing us in one direction. So it's important to come back, and center yourself. For me, it's meditation and prayer, and even in EOS they have, what's called a clarity break. So it's a 1 hour a week where you go, and it's a time to think. No technology. They want you to have just a pad, and write down your thoughts and whatnot. So those are very helpful for me. I don't do them every week as I should, but when I do them, I'm thinking, I need to be doing them more, as leaders, and it helps us to center ourselves, get clarity, and come back to, what's my, what are my values, and what's my purpose.
Excellent. It sounds like if you don't know those values, all you're going to have is your own thoughts and your emotions to react to. So that's why values really give you the foundation on which you can build, true leadership and a true culture for your organization.
Yep. Yep.
Excellent. Well, that does it for this episode of The Trusted Advisor. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. We'd also appreciate if you'd rate us wherever you find your favorite podcasts. My personal philosophy is the more stars, the better, except when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys. I'm sure you'll agree with me. Stephen is a Patriots fan. And if you'd like to learn more best practices for VARs and ISVs in the retail technology industry, check out the RSPA blog. You can find it at gorspa.org and clicking on RSPA blog. Before we go, big thanks again to Stephen Enfield for sharing his wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSPA Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.